Alabama's controversial new immigration law put on hold, at least for now. A federal judge temporarily blocking Alabama from enforcing a new law that would allow police to question suspects about their immigration status. That law was supposed to go into effect on Thursday. The judge says her decision is not based on the merits of the law, but on allowing the court enough time to review it. Bob Dane is Communications Director of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Bob, good to see you. Well, that's got to give you some encouragement there. But then, you and I were talking last week when the hearing took place, and the judge was saying, well, how are you going to enforce this thing without racial profiling? I see a lot of problems with the law, said the judge. How much of this do you think is going to survive?
I think the bulk and the most important part is going to survive. Remember, this court delay is certainly not a denial. Based on what we're hearing, Greg, it looks like the judge seems to feel, as we do, as many do, that federal preemption, the idea that it's our job here in Washington to enforce immigration law, doesn't necessarily preclude meaningful and lawful constitutional participation by states, whereby you have this collaborative federalism, this concurrent authority where the states and the localities and the federal government are all working together to enforce the laws of the land.
And especially, Bob, when the federal government, one can argue, has abdicated its responsibility in this regard. True?
Well, it certainly has. I mean, last year, we were in this similar situation. The federal government went after Arizona, and they said it was our job here in Washington. And yet this past year, there has been the establishment, the deep entrenchment of an affirmative non-enforcement policy. So certainly you've got this reaction to the inaction by Alabama, by Arizona, probably by other states. I mean, ultimately, Greg, what you do want your police to not only be allowed to, but to be required to check immigration status after a lawful stop and reasonable suspicion. And you certainly want your jailers to check immigration status before they release somebody out on the street. Ultimately, at the end of the game, it's reasonable enforcement of rational laws, the states mirroring exactly what the federal government does.
And look, it is not binding at the trial court level in federal courts. What one federal district court judge does, it's not binding on all of the others. Now, having said that, it's not looking good for you because federal judges have rejected this thing in Arizona, Georgia, Indiana, and Utah.
Well, there's another way to look at that, Greg. I mean, it's certainly, I think it's a foregone conclusion that based on the Supreme Court decision recently in Arizona upholding Arizona's right to implement mandatory E-Verify, Alabama is going to get E-Verify, and that protects Alabama workers. But even if this is stopped on technicalities and it winds up going to the Supreme Court, I think the basic element that there is meaningful participation, concurrent authority, as you often say, Greg, I think that's going to stand. That will be a victory for American taxpayers and American workers who are struggling to combat this onslaught, the cost, the impact of illegal immigration that Washington continues to ignore.
Yeah, well, and one final point, we've only got about 30 seconds left. A lot of people who are critical of this law say it's purely penal. That's not necessarily the case. The true people who may be punished, actually, are residents of Alabama because precious few jobs that could be available to legal residents are being taken by illegal residents. Is that the case?
Well, it certainly is, and Alabama is incurring annually $298 million basically subsidizing cheap labor for cheap labor businesses that pad their pockets. One element of this bill allows Alabama to, for example, to keep track of the expenditures they have on public education, which is 3/4 of the cost. So again, I mean, these are meaningful and understandable reactions to a completely negligent, chaotic immigration policy here in Washington.
All right, Bob Dane, Federation for American Immigration Reform. Bob, thanks very much.
Thank you, Greg.